Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites. This is episode 180.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis, sitting in the captain's chair. And first, folks, this is not what you may have expected. We've got a format
Is
change.
it the Spanish Inquisition?
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. You
well
know
done.
that.
Well done, both of you. Well done. All
Yes,
kind
that's
of well
right.
done, Monty Python.
Well, you know, Monty Python also talks about new subject, completely new subject. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Format change. We are now dropping new episodes the second and fourth Friday of every week. Not every week, but
Every month.
Every month. And no longer every week. 6 a.m. instead of noon. We thought we'd give it to you a little early. So
That's right. Our present to you.
very much so.
Yes.
So that's why, and in doing this, we reshuffled what our plans were. So we're actually moving into our penultimate episode on our philosopher series. We decided we're going to do Hegel. We decided to give him the boot.
Yes.
and
Give Hegel a pass.
that's right. And we're going into the one we've been talking about for I don't know how long. John Stuart Mill.
Right.
The guy we have sworn to burn in effigy. Here's our title.
Right. And so the format change, though, is not only just are we moving from every week to twice a month,
Right.
semi-monthly, but we're folding the history, people, and pop culture into the first episode that month.
Right.
Right.
Which is still probably going to be mostly history and our heroes / people you
Right.
should know.
Right.
Pop
Those were all history anyway, really.
For the most part, yeah.
And even our pop culture was cultural history. 'Cause
Right.
we weren't doing anything current.
Well,
it's
we
not
did,
like we're
we
doing,
did some.
They weren't super current.
Well,
We mostly just to make fun of current pop culture.
I
I mean, it's
Well,
not
I'm
like
thinking things
we weren't doing Taylor Swift episodes or anything.
No. I mean,
wasn't she next on our heroes?
no,
No.
no, she's not.
So,
I thought Martin had that one next on the calendar.
but we're retaining Code of Honor as the second episode of the month.
Yes.
And then everything else folds into the first episode.
So you
which,
never know.
Yes, gives us
what
a
you-
huge banner. It resolves the problem we have with deciding what to do with our heroes.
Yes.
So now the people are faded in, or folded in, so we can do anything with the people. We can do, history's jerks, or whatever it was that we were going to do.
History's dirtbags.
History's
Sorry,
dirtbags.
that was your idea, and you forgot the word. I mean, that was your turn.
Well, no, I remembered the word, but you told me I couldn't use it on the air.
Did I say that? Did we say that? Dirtbags?
No. It used to be douchebags.
Yes.
Oh, that's it. No.
Yes.
Dirtbags is a cool word. I always
Yes.
liked that word.
Yes.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
going to, history's douchebag, but you all said I couldn't use that on
Did
the
we?
air.
Because I haven't seen any. It might have been him. 'cause I
Well,
don't-
perhaps. I mean, dirtbag is just, it's better.
I believe
like
some of Francis's listeners that he's attracted to the podcast may have sensitive ears.
well, we've lost those two people.
Yes.
Oh, no, gentlemen. This comes from the guy who's the first one to ever drop the F-bomb. Come on.
True. Well, you did it accidentally.
That's correct.
I did it on purpose.
That's true.
And Hoopa Jubes will not disappear.
No, that's
They will
right.
still happen on those fifth Fridays. So some months you will get the bonus.
That's right.
There will be 3 episodes in
Right.
some
Because
months.
Hoopa Jubes are too much fun to get rid of.
Yes.
That's
they
right.
have to
We'll
stay.
do them whenever we feel like it.
Well, I think
Never
we're probably
know.
still going to try and do them when there's a fifth Friday.
That's
right?
a general rule. That's correct.
Yes.
We might skip one if we run into things. We've not run into the issue of running out of content yet.
Right.
And I
right.
think this will help us resolve. I think this format is much more sustainable long term than every week.
Well, yeah. I mean,
It
it's
resolves
been
so many things for us.
Yeah. Personally, it's been not necessarily a struggle, but to do the episodes all the time. Sometimes it has been. It has certainly been a struggle to find a weekend where we can get them all done.
That's right.
Where we have all day, because it takes all day.
It's an all-day thing for 4 or 5 episodes.
Right. And that's been hard because, Francis and my weekends can be really packed. I mean, not that Martin's can't, but we've got some outside hard and fast.
Yeah, I
Things
mean, my
that-
naps are important to me.
Well, yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
naps are
I
important.
mean,
Oh, please
Booch-
don't rub it in.
Boot
Please.
you guys out of Studio M so I could take a nap.
Oh.
That's valid.
The perils of getting older, gentlemen. I didn't say old. Older.
Older.
That's
Older.
right. All right. It's okay.
So well done, Francis. I appreciate the working that through and letting the listeners know. So yes, I know you were expecting whatever the history topic was for this week. I've already forgotten, but instead you're getting John Stuart Mill.
That's right. Exactly. And that's where we're going to go with this. We've been speaking of him in many respects for years now. It could be argued by some he was the most influential philosopher of the 19th century. I don't think that is too much of an arguable point. I believe that his philosophy of utilitarianism in particular governs our modern way of looking at things.
Before you get too far, and I know you guys hate doing bio, but I always think a little bit of context is...
We're getting there.
Bio is important. I think that's extremely important because...
But give me a window about his life.
Oh, he's born in 1806, dies in 1873.
So he's
that's a window, all right. Pretty broad, pretty minimalist.
So but you're starting out Napoleonic era.
That's right.
But an era, unlike a lot of the people we've talked about, this is an era of stability in Britain, and he is English.
That's right. Generally speaking, you are correct.
And this is the peak, really, of the British Empire.
Correct, yeah. Because
he is an empire guy. This is all he knows.
Very much so, yeah. He is, for the latter half of his life, he is Victorian. He wasn't before that, because, Victoria ascends, in the 1830s.
Right, but I mean... describing his era as part of the Victorian era is very...
It's not inaccurate.
I mean, that's very much to the point. Again, that is the peak. That is the whole the sun never sets on the Union Jack.
Well, actually, isn't he? He dies in 70. So he really most of his career is pre-Victorian era.
Well, he becomes really famous right around the time Victoria ascends. And what's really what I think you're going for here is
even before Victoria though.
Yeah,
I mean Brits are it's India, it's Canada, it's Africa, it's everywhere. The Brits are everywhere already.
Yeah, right. I'm just saying that I wouldn't associate him with Victorianism specifically because he is certainly he is before her primarily.
Yeah,
but
doesn't mean the effect isn't felt.
Right, because the point I was trying to make with comparing him to Victorianism is because his philosophy is absolutely antithetical to the traditional Victorian morality that dominates this period.
Yes, he very much, for his day, is a political liberal.
A libertine.
However you want to put he was an early feminist in the sense that he called for women's suffrage. He was the second member of parliament to do that.
That's right.
So he was very, very early jumped on that, wrote a feminist work, The Subjection of Women. He had some, and we were looking at quotes for Code of Honor on him. He's very much anti-conservative of the day.
Right.
Probably be very anti-conservative of modern day as well.
He would be. He's very progressive in many ways, but that's not the reason that we have issues with him. We'll kind of get into that. Because much of this is very good.
And stress that progressive doesn't necessarily equate to what you would see as a today
progressive then does not mean today's socialist progressive, because that's
I mean, he's not talking about breaking down the whole system or any of that. I mean, he is British through and through.
He's not for defunding the bobbies.
Yeah.
That would not be a call he would
put that throughout it.
But again, in some. He would have been seen somewhat as a radical, again, with calling for women's suffrage and all that.
He was very much socially progressive, not necessarily politically so. Yeah. And that's where, meaning, we're going to change things. I don't
know that you can really, especially with some of the issues that he had, can divorce politically from socially.
That's correct.
I mean, in
it's
general.
Complicated. Hello, thank you.
But he's not the progenitor of utilitarianism.
No, he is not.
No, that's Jeremy Bentham.
That's correct, but he is the one that made it.
But his dad's tight with Bentham,
completely polished it to become what the full flowering occurs under him. No question, because of his works that he puts out. And just to give you a little bit of the bio on him, not to go very deep with this, but he was brought forth with a unbelievably strict upbringing, almost imprisoned in many respects by his father, who saw him as a social experiment.
Yeah, I mean, he was almost living vicariously through the son.
No question, which we don't see that.
As like I can make the perfect person.
That's right. He's very Frankensteinian in a way, because his father, I am going to make him the perfect intellect. And he's reading Greek at 3, folks. But he was a prodigy. He was an absolute genius. There's no question about that. Just look at his bio, and he does an autobiography, which is one of the reasons we know so much about him.
Yeah.
But he and Jeremy Bentham is pretty much part of the progenitor intellectually of his utilitarianism. It's very, very important. But Mill's father was a friend and co-conspirator, I suppose you might say, with Bentham. He was an adherent to him, and he saw that his son would be the one to carry on the idea forward, which he does end up doing. But he has a freaking nervous breakdown at 20.
Mm-hmm.
Because
he nearly he contemplates suicide. He has some serious mental health issues.
The absolute fire hose of strictness of his upbringing. Looking back on it today, of course, I wasn't there, but it's almost borders to me on child abuse of a very different type. A lot of
child
psychological
rearing back then.
That's right.
We would consider child abuse today.
Yes, but
we were raised would be considered child abuse by now.
As a total, as a deliberate focus, what his father was trying to do with him, make him into a minion, comes through that. He's reading Xenophon and Herodotus at the age of 8. It's amazing what he's gone through here. He finally, after that nervous breakdown, he recognizes, this is me speaking, this is kind of putting the meta into this, that what he's been sold up to this point is not quite the way it is. It shouldn't be this way.
He finally made kind of an emerge to find his own direction. Which ironically he does do what his father had wished him to do. But he does so for a very different reason, because he takes it much further than Bentham ever did. And that's how utilitarianism is his saga. It is his...
in many ways, let's cut to the chase here. Dancing around, nobody really, I think, cares about a lot of that stuff in so much as this. He has this really strict upbringing that is imposed upon him, as opposed to being guided into an intellectual flowering of his own.
It's not a strict upbringing in the sense of, I want to protect you.
It's
I have this goal.
I'm controlling you.
Yeah,
that's right.
I'm trying to control you to this goal.
Right, and that is what causes not only the break, but I think that is strictly and directly leads to his views on utilitarianism.
Exactly.
And he essentially is the prototypical libertarian.
Yes.
No offense to our resident libertarian-minded
Marcus Aurelius.
Libertarianism absolutely owes its intellectual existence to utilitarianism.
Well, because his whole point is an individual should be free to do whatever they want, in so much as they do not harm anyone else.
That's exactly,
is the way he puts it.
In a nutshell.
While that is ultimately a nice modifier, utilitarianism goes beyond that. It really does, because it usually drops off as long as we don't harm anybody else, because then it becomes the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which almost always implies that greatest good for the greatest number of people, some harm for some other people.
That's correct.
Which is basically, we can do whatever we want to you as long as it benefits us. And as long as there are more of us than there are of you,
because it can be used as a cover for almost anything.
And that's where we are today. Yeah. That's one of the reasons that we have such an issue with him. Because he works through a system of logic. If you read his book on liberty, which is lays it all out very clearly, when you read that, you say, well, of course. You realize you don't think into where the logical conclusion of this goes and the macro level. It's easy to see that freedom is a gift in many respects, and he there are many great things in his work that you can pull out and say, well, of course we believe that. So much of what we believe in the modern American society stems from him. We talked about the roots with Locke, A lot of it is there politically speaking, but socially and politically too, it's Mill.
Yeah.
It's very much where we've ended up.
Manifest Destiny is very much a utilitarianism kind of philosophy.
I like that. Yes, that's very good.
The white people can put the land to better use than the red people.
Right.
So
even
they don't have any.
Right. So naturally, that is very much. But even rugged individualism is very much a utilitarianism, in the sense that whatever I think is good for me is okay, and a lot of what that's not a full summation of that, but of rugged individualism. But the whole idea about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps implies that you are allowed to do, and not only just allowed, but have the God-given right to do whatever it is that you want to better
and
yourself.
your obligation, really.
Yeah,
to do
which
what you
very
want.
much a Nietzschean kind of idea in that sense. But again, it all goes back to
And they would have been contemporaries.
Well,
to
he
our
predates
theory.
Nietzsche a bit.
he does,
Just
yeah,
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
They overlap some, but it was
very
all-
much the end of Mill and beginning of Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And plus, given the language differences, there's probably not a whole lot of that overlap in a practical sense until much later. But anyways, the whole idea that you have this obligation to do these things that either better yourself, whatever. It almost always, there is a lack of a consideration for a societal good or a societal responsibility.
That's right.
And because the societal responsibility is the presumption that, well, what we're choosing to do, especially when you start talking about applying this at the macro level, is that it's a good enough or a good for enough people that overrides those that we harm. And that's I think that's really where our biggest problem is.
The thing about this, on that level, it's very seductive. But you see later where he became politically, and he was very much for kind of an activist government too.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this
That's very
era,
Hobbesian. In
yeah,
his ways.
he's in this era of stability.
Yeah.
So he's not so much concerned about small government and preserving people's rights. He's about what can the government do to fix things. So the bad ideas stack one on the next. Inheritance taxes, he's all for, and using tax policy to affect change and things like this. It's like, wow, that's a horribly bad idea.
But it's the basis of modern government in the United States.
Yeah, and in Britain.
Yeah.
And so it's like...
Well, everywhere in the West, really.
Yeah, it's like, wait, how did... So it's just this huge globby mess that he makes of everything.
Well, he's well spoken with his arguments. In fact, we can certainly say that if you read his book, he's very, very the seductive words you use is very clear, because he does recognize some of this stuff here. He sees social liberty is a big thing for him, but it's protection from the tyranny of political rulers,
which is at odds with a lot of what we associate with Mills. Because again, when you start talking about, I go back to that greatest good for the greatest number. That almost has to lead you to a tyranny, not only of the majority, in the sense that the majority has to approve it, but then that directly leads to a tyranny of the minority rulers. Because they start imposing things, saying, well, this is for your good. We know better, and we are your betters. And this is where a lot of the philosophy of the 1800s come from, is we know better than you.
Yeah.
And so so we say it's for your own good, so therefore you should ascribe to this. And so I find like a lot of the philosophers of the time, they hold contradictory positions.
Mill does address the entire concept of social liberty from the government and also from the tyranny of the majority. That's one of the phrases that he actually coins to talk about that.
He has a great quote about it. It's really long, but essentially the point is we should never silence one voice in favor of the thousands, because that one voice might actually be correct, or at least have an element of truth in it, which is a great ideal.
That's right.
But ultimately, it's unworkable with a lot of where his philosophy takes people.
Right, and that's one of the reasons he's all for this the level of government interference. That's not the phrase he uses. It's more like a system of constitutional checks.
Yes.
That's what he calls it, to prevent those things, a tyranny of any type. And I think that's very consistent with his basis. Is if we're all about liberty, tyranny is the ultimate enemy, and it can be either social or political,
Or both. But and this is where, and maybe it's just because we're looking back with at these various philosophers that I've critiqued for if you look at where it ultimately goes, we're looking at it with hindsight, saying, well, obviously this is where it goes because we see these examples today, and the government having the power to protect you from tyranny has enough power to impose tyranny. It's a double-edged sword. It's a very fine line to be able to walk, and it's in my opinion, it's impossible to walk that fine line permanently. Somewhere along the way, it's going to fall off.
Yeah, and he saw broad-ranging taxation, especially, as the most important government policy to institute equality among people. But his caveat is always a tax policy judiciously applied.
Right. Well, it's like Adam
that's
said.
Never going to happen,
Well, it's like Adam said about us. Our system of government is built for a moral people.
Yeah.
And that's the implication. A lot of this stuff is that as soon as you start becoming selfish, because at that point I think is when you become immoral, is when you start becoming selfish and looking out for your particular interests as opposed to your societal responsibilities, that's when it turns evil. And that's almost always going to happen, and honestly, I think it happens far faster than anybody expects.
And I think that's the important realization for where Mill breaks down so strongly for us is you have to safeguard against your ideas then being used to build tyranny.
To build Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially...
You give government a lever of power to do something good.
But inherent in that is they have the power to do bad as well.
Right. You've also given them the same lever to do something horrible.
That's correct.
Because it can be applied in multiple ways.
Right. And you have to be able to see that. And Mill doesn't see that.
Well,
Mill doesn't understand that part of our character.
Government is the check. He recognizes society can go off on its own very easily towards tyranny. He recognizes society's tendencies toward tyranny. He sets government aside. And this is a very Victorian idea.
Yeah.
It's actually Hobbesian in many respects.
Yeah.
But the government is supposed to be beyond such things. It should be the check that prevents these things from happening.
So I think that's naive.
Well, that's correct.
Incredibly
That's exactly it. He does not see that government itself, by giving them this much power, whatever that is, whatever it looks like, it will tend towards tyranny as well.
Well, and I think the issue there is, let's put it in context for him, is that I wouldn't necessarily say we give him a pass for this, but I think it makes it understandable. And that is that he comes from a time, especially in England, where societal norms, the aristocracy, all of that, which is, he comes from that level of society, if not the aristocracy itself. But he comes from that level of society where that societal norm, the imposition of that, is far more powerful.
That's correct.
Than anything else, including what the government can do at this point. Now, obviously, there's always a balance. So we've gotten to the point where I think it's the opposite. Societal norm. Well, no, I think there's a push and pull. It's a chicken or the egg thing now.
Yeah.
Back then, societal norms pushed the government. Now, I think it goes both ways. Government pushes societal norms, and societal norms, in turn, push the government. Can one of you let Boss go out? He has decided it is time to take his leave. He's had enough of our discussions.
Time to nap somewhere else.
He's
a good boy.
At his age, I expect him to, that's his job, is to nap.
Yeah.
When Nemers comes over later, he's probably going to be right back in here. So, listeners, you may get to audibly meet second daughter's new dog, Nemo, whom I affectionately call Nemers. And he will be coming over later, and I'm not sure if they'll be here before we finish recording. So if not this episode, maybe the next episode. Who knows?
I look forward to it. I love when we have
He's puppies. A little bagel. Nemo has his own Instagram.
Oh, good Lord.
Of course
Yes.
he does.
Nemo the Bagel. So if you want to go to Instagram and visit Nemo the Bagel, you will see what he looks like. He's very cute. He's adorable. He's very very cuddly.
He's a good boy.
Very good
He's a
boy.
good boy.
He, I'm sure, is going to jump right up in Francis's lap and want to
Because
cuddle.
we're here at Studio R.
joy.
Oh yes, we haven't even announced where we are. We're in Studio R here, recording in the atrium, and enjoying the view. Of course, it's fall, so the view's not quite as good, but
You're starting to have some very nice color here in your area in
Yes.
your neighborhood.
it's not quite as vivid
You have
as
a
I would
ton of
like.
mature
But it's,
trees,
we
so-
do, yes. Not
There's
nearly
some-
the evergreens.
Still some green. They haven't. Late October, it's not quite peak color here.
No, I can see a little bit of red over there, but we don't. It's not the variety that I grew up with, but it's more than we get in a lot of places here in Jefferson County, which is really nice. The leaves, though, are horrible. If you look, we just got the cover on the pool this past week, and already there's a ton of water and leaves on the top, which is just lovely.
Yeah, and it kind of depends on the tree species too.
It does. It does.
Oaks I think, are always kind of last.
Yeah.
Oaks
yeah.
are last. So you've got a little bit of oaks and some maples. I think the maples are turning. They're kind of yellow looking.
Yeah.
You don't have a ton of red and orange.
No, unfortunately,
you don't have those
you can see it just if you can't see it from where you guys are, but I can see a little bit of red straight across from here. Which I kind of wish we had a little bit of that back here, but it's a great view. It's one of the nice things. It's really the only place we record where we get a decent view because we're in Martin's basement and in the game room, which is in the back of the house for Francis. So it's one of the things I do look forward about hosting here. It's not just the fact that I don't have to leave the house, but just get the view.
Get more view here in the atrium than Studio F or Studio M.
Yep. So since we've paused, I guess
Our arms are
Francis-
tired from swinging so far at the
pinata.
the Mill pinata.
I guess now would be a good time to have a bourbon break if that is amenable to our captain.
I think we're already there.
So
Shall we go for it? Yes.
Would you prefer to go first, sir?
Well, yeah. It really doesn't matter because you and I are drinking the exact same thing here, and we're of course looting Robert's stash every time we come over here. We're doing one we've not done before here. I don't think
Yes, we have.
We have to have done
Yes,
this.
we have,
because
yeah.
There's more of this bottle missing here than I realized. But Old Forester is one of our favorites in many respects, and it has an enormous brand diversity of different. I hate to use the word flavor because that's
craft, small batch.
Yeah, different versions of the very old name here. This is the 100 proof.
it's the Old Forester Signature series,
exactly,
which is signed by the master distiller.
I think regular Old Forester is 86 proof.
Yes, which is very good as well.
So good, and then this is 100, and then the
Prohibition style is 110.
100 Prohibition style is my favorite.
Yeah, it stands up barked pretty loud.
Yeah.
And the 1897 version is like
Also
90
good.
proof. So
Yeah.
you've got the brand is so good that you can find whatever proof you like, whether you like it weaker or stronger. They have that, but this one here is supposed to be the perfection.
Yes.
Shall we say? It's kind of
It
like
is considered top of the line.
It's meant to be the sweet spot. And
I don't know, that Prohibition style is hard to beat because I really love the complexity of that one.
This one has
many
this
things.
and this is the same way. And I've had mine over ice, just the same as you are.
Yeah.
And my ice is long melted. How did you get your ice to stay long? We filled it at the same time. You must have used more.
More.
Yeah, I used just a little bit here. It is still chilled, and but that melting ice brings forth an enormous bouquet. Stays in the mouth.
It's Kentucky Kiss.
It's Kentucky Kiss. That's right. Around the tongue, around the teeth. It does not go up, does not go down.
Very mellow.
Very mellow, very mild. At 100 proof though, so it definitely shows itself to be one of the very top of the line. I really enjoy it.
And surprisingly, this is not even a corked bottle; it is a screw cap. But because you don't expect a quality bourbon like that to not be a cork. But
What's the price point? You remember?
I do not. It was under 40. It might have been around 30.
I want to say it's about 30. Most of the other Old Foresters are around that, between 30 and 40.
They're
A little more up there, but not much.
I just don't remember. I'm sure at that that particular one, it's probably in the 35 range, give or take a little. I just don't recall. It's been a while.
The one I've been looking for is called Statesman, Old Forester Statesman, that I want to try, and I think it's a 52 to 55 bottle.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so that's one I want to try and get my hands on, but I don't know, that might not be a good thing to lay out $50 for a bottle.
Well,
Martin, my
what else are you going to spend it on? Says I.
Ammo, yeah.
Yeah, that was easy.
Yeah.
Well, but you.
But that deserves a little dap from Robert right there.
Yeah.
You laid out some cash for that Michter's. That's not a cheap bottle.
That's 42, yeah.
I thought it was a little bit higher than that.
Usually 48.
You got it on sale.
42,
Okay,
43.
Okay, yeah.
So, and then some of the Old Foresters are tickling 50. The Yellowstone Select, I think, is tickling $40.
That's right.
Well, the Woodford Double Oaked retails 60. If you're lucky, you can find it for 50.
That's right.
Rarely will you find it under.
But I want to get my hands on some Old Forester Statesman and some of that Yellowstone Select.
If you can find Yellowstone.
Yeah, that's super hard to find.
Well, and one of the reasons is the popularity of the TV show.
Yeah.
They'll tell you that. Even though the one has nothing to do with the other.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's got the name, and people can kick back and watch the 5th season in November here with their Yellowstone bourbon in their hand. I'll be there watching that very thing with Mrs. Francis because she... you guys don't watch it, so I can't talk much about it. Let's just say Kelly Riley's character of Beth Dutton, Mrs. Francis wants to be her. She is very close to her in many ways because she takes no prisoners.
Okay.
She is the strongest person on the planet, my wife and Beth Dutton. So it's easy to see, very much so.
Aside from the show, that Yellowstone Select was killer. I mean, there's a reason to drink it besides the name. That was good stuff, right up there.
Made in Great
Wild Turkey,
Great Lebanon, Kentucky. That's right.
It was super good.
So now, if you guys are done, I can get mine in here.
Please,
You spend 20 minutes on your bourbon, which is fine. So I'm finishing off my Knob Creek 9-year.
I was going to say,
this I've had for some time.
I was going to say, that bottle is now empty.
And it is now empty. It's part of that 3-pack I got from the kids a year or two ago.
It's what, 20 ounces?
No. It's
that much.
375 milliliter, whatever that is.
Instead of a 750. It's half size.
Half size, yeah. It's your travel bottle.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. And, Knob Creek is a great bourbon. And the 9-year, anything aged 9 years is going to be a good bourbon.
Yeah, it's a primo size.
Of course, I had it on the rocks. I don't add a whole lot of ice because by the time I get through mine, it's usually melted, so I don't want to dilute it. I probably should only put 1 cube in here because I normally do 2 because it didn't have quite enough to do as much as I would have liked. So it's a little more watered down than I would normally do.
Okay, yeah.
By the way, I will note that we went to the track a couple weeks ago, and my youngest, who has appeared here on the podcast, Bjorn, yes.
He's forgotten his own kid's name.
Yes. Bjorn had to have a bourbon at the track.
Yeah,
and much like Francis, he ordered neat, but you can't get actual neat at the track.
Really?
They will always put at least 1 ice cube in.
Interesting.
Some rule, but the young woman behind the bar who served us so ably says that's the rule. I have to put at least 1 ice cube in.
Yeah, once you get it, you can take it out.
And so but he had a couple bourbons.
What do you have?
Oh gosh, I've already forgotten. But I think he ordered good stuff though. He recently brought home Flatboat 125.
Oh, I've seen that at Liquor Barn or whatever the one is by Sam's Club.
125.
Yes.
Wow.
It'll take the paint off the walls.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't care for it. He liked it a lot.
Too medicinal or
it's
just too harsh?
So overpowering.
So overpowering, yeah.
Even with ice, the proof is so overpowering.
Yeah, you almost have to put a lot of ice in that and let it melt for you to be able to drink something like that.
Yeah,
125 is big.
It just sort of consumed all of the flavor inside of it.
Well, that's 50% more than a standard bottle. Yeah. The standard bottle is 80 proof, right?
Yeah.
So, that's 50% more. So this, the Knob Creek, very smooth, especially at 9-year. Hint of sweetness. This is interesting because you get both the Kentucky Kiss and the Kentucky Hug
Nice and warm right there.
Because you get the nice flavor on the tongue, and then which is the kiss. But then you get it here in the chest and the stomach, and it hangs around there. So you get a nice long hug too.
Really,
that's one of the reasons why I like this Knob Creek.
It's the standard for many people. I mean,
it is a phenomenal bourbon.
Made by Beam, which has.
It's not terribly expensive, generally speaking.
No, it can be. It can be. That's correct.
It's a good bourbon.
Is it on sale about 28?
I don't know because I didn't buy this particular bottle.
Well, that's a small size.
It's a small size anyway.
You're about right. It and Basil Hayden are two. They're two of the Beams.
They're usually
small batch
30 to
premium.
35.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
The Basil has started to creep up in price again.
Yeah, Basil Hayden usually runs a little bit more.
Yeah, now it's finding its way up because they read in the bottle.
Apparently, we talked about it being worthy of a higher price, and they've listened to us and they've started to raise the price. So that's on us, folks.
Yeah, that's right. We're sorry, but it's well worth the price.
It is still worth the price because that basil is really good. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and this what you're drinking there is a higher proof, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's only a 90, isn't it?
Yeah, I want to say basil is like 84.
Yeah, something like that.
So yeah, it's a little bit more.
No, this is 100 proof. So yeah,
I was going to say this. I thought I'm sitting there looking at the bottle. Yeah, it's 100 proof. Yeah, and that's a different level. It's meant to be.
Well, and that higher proof. Partially, I think that's related to the fact that it's a 9-year bourbon.
Yeah.
It's hard to get, I think, a lower proof on the more aged ones. It seems like those seem to be a higher proof.
Well, they probably start out higher proof when they go in the barrel, and then
I think
they decline some as they go. So if they're trying to hit a target proof, they know where they've got to start when it goes in the barrel.
Could be, yeah. I am still woefully ignorant about some of the details and the mechanics.
We need to go on a bourbon tour somewhere.
We do.
A distillery tour so that we'll get the...
in a couple of weeks, on the 13th, I am doing with the daughters, first and second daughter, and Mrs. Robert and I are going to Woodford.
Oh, wonderful.
And we are doing a tour.
You'll have to report back.
Yes, I am looking forward to that.
Take notes, and you'll get a lot of this, how they, what the target proof is, where they end up.
Yeah, I need to ask a lot of questions.
Where it goes into the,
Absolutely, because I've not been to Woodford. I've been to Heaven Hill and I've been to Makers.
Yeah.
Makers, I tell you what, we did a Christmas one. They do a great thing. Oh my gosh, Makers knows how to put on a party.
And that's been their gift for a long, long time because they're literally out in the middle of nowhere.
They are.
Yeah,
I mean depending on
I'm from the area. I'm telling you, it's still in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, if you're coming in from Louisville, you're going to end up driving down this one-lane road past a bunch of trailers to get there. Now, if you come in from the south or the east, it's a little bit more normal roads. But if you're coming in from Louisville from the north, the most direct route is you're getting on this road. It's like I feel like banjos are going to start playing.
It's from Bardstown on down towards Loretto, which is very small.
Yes.
On towards. Between Loretta and Lebanon. Lebanon is fairly decent size. It's kind of seat. If you come in that way, it's very
regular
normal.
roads.
But if you're coming through Loretto, which comes through Bardstown, yes, it's going to be very small.
You feel very. It's like holy crap. You feel lost.
It is a 2-lane road, I must say. It is not 1 lane, but it is very.
If it's
rural.
a 2-lane road, it's meant for like 2 horses passing side by side.
It's very rural. It's very
because
rural.
it's some pretty. I mean, there's no. I mean, the particular stretch I'm thinking of, there's no stripes on that road.
Oh, I think that anyway. That might be once you get into that, going back to them, to come to think.
Yeah, I mean, it's not far from the actual, if I remember correctly.
The main road is not all that main, actually.
Well, compared to this segment,
that's correct.
Yes. Main Street's no bigger than a driveway.
Yeah, you're in a small town. Actually, you know what? Those are my favorite kinds of town. They really are. I mean, I would have no problem living in a small town like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just as long as I have good internet access and don't have to drive 30 minutes just to get to the gas station and, an hour to get to the Kroger's, which is part of the problem. It's hard to find that mix. Yeah, small town, but easily accessible
there's an
amenities.
There's an IGA there in Loretta, which is actually the closest. And there's a wonderful little restaurant, the Cozy Kettle, there, in which you wouldn't think this town... because it's about the size of New Haven where I grew up, 1,000 people maybe. It's got a restaurant.
Well, a town that size though, they can support a restaurant.
That's right.
Maybe 2, maybe. You're probably going to support a couple of bars and
That's right.
saloons, taverns.
There's something to be said for that. Yes, this is Marion County, and yes, there's plenty of that out that way.
So it just depends on the actual size and whether or not it's dry or wet.
And Marion County is kind of notorious.
It can be. Yes, that's right. Yes, sir. You have to go. Raywick is the notorious area.
Yes,
area.
Raywick.
That's a little further over.
Cornbread Mafia
that's
area.
Correct. It's all through there. That's right.
That's the dope guys.
There's
I don't know how we got from Knob Creek to all of that, but
actually, Knob Creek is just across the Rolling Fork River from Nelson County. It's in LaRue County, which is ironically dry.
Yes,
but that's where John Boone and many others had their grist.
It still amazes me. Is there any other state that has wet and dry counties besides us?
I believe so.
There's got to be. Good question.
I believe so.
That would require a little research.
Maybe Tennessee, but I mean, it's got to be southern.
I believe Louisiana. Some parishes are wet and some are dry.
See, now that seems really odd considering the Catholic population.
And considering
that's where the divides are.
Because
Nelson, Marion, Washington counties were all what we call the Kentucky Holy Lands, where all the Catholics originally settled. This is before Louisville even was.
Right.
One time Bardstown was the seat of the diocese.
That's right. That's right, because there wasn't nobody else, but all the Catholics came down and they were there. However, on the other side of the river was LaRue County. And while the Catholics would populate just on the other side, by the time you got very far, that's where the non-Catholics went. And in these days, in the 1800s, the twain shall not meet, because we will be persecuted by them from over there.
I mean, that's why there's a part of Louisville called Germantown.
That's right.
And that's where they settled, and that was
Paristown as well, which is just over the way. It's just on the other block where the French immigrants would go.
And they were the Catholic, German, and French immigrants.
That's correct. Which, ironically, they were still against each other.
Well, my original parish was St. Paul's.
Yeah.
St. Paul's grew out of that French and German split in the late 1800s. Because it was St. Anthony's up on the hill. The cemetery is still up there and it's still called St. Anthony's. But when everything split, it split along those ethnic. We would call them ethnic then, but really it's just national divides.
Nationalistic, but religion was kind of folded into that too. I mean, there was.
They were still German Catholics. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just Louisville is highly. I don't want to say predominantly, but highly Catholic, and yet they were still not immune to persecution.
No, I'm talking about my split, or my split, but the split.
The parish.
Yeah, obviously it's not going to be religious divides, but it's. Yeah. It's going to be language and cultural divides.
That's right. We don't want them French-speaking folks with us. We're Germans.
We're talking about it happened after the German-French
Franco-Prussian War.
Yeah, Franco-Prussian War. Yes.
So, as if we didn't like each other before, we really don't like each other.
Right. So even though none of those people fought in it, but the ancestral home.
That's correct.
Was a big deal.
Prejudice unfortunately still reigns. Within us.
Yes.
All right. So I think that was a good rest. We rested our arms. Now it's time to start taking some serious swings at the John Stuart Mill pinata.
Go ahead.
Again, the more I look, the more I'm like, well, that's a horrible idea. Well, that's a horrible idea.
Which ideas are horrible? So let's get, because we've talked very generalities about why we want to swing at his pinata. What are the bad ideas?
Let's talk about those. Remember, he ended up as a member of Parliament.
Right.
So he got to advocate for this crap.
But he did advocate for some good things.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that you read here. The tyranny of the majority, tyranny of political rulers, the individual's rights and liberties that must have a system of constitutional...
But he would speak out against that, but at the same time, try to make the government more powerful.
Well, you see, and I think a lot of that goes back to where he's coming from here. He's seeing it.
Right. He's a product of his time of Britain is not just stable, but the most powerful entity in the world.
Right. And also,
therefore, let's use that power for something he thinks is a good thing.
Well, everybody but to be fair, and again, not that I'm a pro-Mills guy necessarily, but what I'm saying is that he comes from a time when societal influence is stronger than governmental influence.
That's
also... Everybody who has power wants to use it for whatever they think is good. I mean, that's not just...
Right, I mean...
because
even Thanos thought he was doing something good.
Exactly.
Very well put, sir.
Yeah. Well, nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be evil today.
They wake up thinking, I'm saving the world.
Right.
I'm saving Germany. I'm saving the universe.
Exactly.
But, for a libertarian, he's like, oh, let's do income tax. Let's do inheritance tax.
Right. Like I said, he's very much at odds.
And then restrict what they would call back then sumptuary consumption. What we would call today conspicuous consumption.
Right.
And to me, that's like, how can you be a libertarian and talk about limiting what people can buy? If
Right.
they have the money, let them freaking buy it.
Well, yeah, see, he comes from a different place.
Right. I mean, we've come from an era where, or at least from my perspective, if Larry Ellison buys a 200-foot yacht, why does that hurt me? Whereas other people are, he could be using his money for something good. Well, but he spent a ton of money.
Put it out in the economy and people have jobs.
He didn't stuff it under his mattress.
That's right.
Right, he didn't spend it on hookers and blow.
Hookers and blow.
Well, there are those that say sex workers have to have a good living too.
So,
I'm kidding with that.
I just got to throw this in. Mrs. Martin hates it that I have taken the Burl Ives song "Silver and Gold."
You remember making it hookers and blow.
Hookers and blow. From Rudolph. You remember Rudolph?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I changed all the lyrics to be hookers and blow.
And she hates that.
And she hates it. She says,
I cannot understand why.
My Christmas.
I was to say, yes, I knew where this was going. I could have written that line.
Yes.
You're exactly right. But one of the things you have to remember here is because it's so much, that's in that area, you're absolutely right, of course, but Mill was focused on many other things because his liberty, this is not an era of civil rights. It's almost, such things are almost completely curtailed.
Right.
That's where he's really putting his focus. That's, I think, the gasoline that's driving him. He sees this great class differentiation. This terrible class separation, which is ironic in the age of colonialism in Britain, mind you.
Well, I was just about to say.
That's why he was so much of a radical, is that, what do you mean?
Well,
everybody has basic human rights.
But do they see? This is the thing, and this is where I go back to where these guys are inconsistent at best. So he's all for ending slavery in the U.S. Now, granted, the slave trade is stopped and slavery of Africans in England.
Yes,
we're done there.
Yes.
I mean,
however, slavery of Africans in Africa, well, maybe we're okay with that. Slavery of Indians in India, maybe we're okay with that.
Well, because it's not called slavery; it's called colonialism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
which is kind of my point. He's looking at things through a little bit of rose-colored glasses in a way. The things that I can see personally, I'm against that. And obviously with slavery in the U.S., that's a very much an in-their-face thing because, we've started to have closer ties with England at this point. We're still not the buddies that we would become because,
it's also, in the United States, it's a national crisis during
and it
his
is
life.
a national crisis.
Because he dies, 8 years after the Civil War ends.
Yeah.
So most of his ascendancy time is in the 1840s and 50s, which it's being screamed on the world stage about this issue. And of course it reaches
the world stage is, Europe.
Yes, exactly.
Because again, colonialism in Africa and in India and China and in the southeast.
Yeah, he never called for divesting the empire of his colony. No.
Well, because those people weren't enslaved. See,
Yes,
but from their end, they felt it. Anyway.
Well, that's correct because they were not institutionalized in that. But nevertheless,
it wasn't institutionalized in the sense that we are buying and selling, literally putting people on a block.
Well, that's correct.
But it was institutionalized.
Well, that's
slavery.
what I think. It's worth. Well, I think that there's a differentiation here that we should make on that because, in many respects, what he is avoiding talking about is perhaps more. I don't want to say it's more insidious. I don't want to put a adversarial relationship between colonialism and the institution of slavery as seen in the United States, for example. Nevertheless, both are heinous. And Mill, for as much of a forward thinker as he was, didn't really. he did. There was only so far that he went. Maybe he just didn't get around to it. I don't
Well, he's
know.
a product of his age as well.
That's kind of where I want to.
Right, in as much as he is driving as a thought leader of his time,
Yeah.
he's also soaking up ideas from other people, and he's incorporating their mistakes and bad ideas into his bad ideas. He's being influenced by Malthus. He's being influenced by Marx, who are contemporaries. He's taking their goo and mixing it into his goo and coming up with really horrible ideas.
Well, again, this is where I want to go with what are the horrible ideas, because one of the things that I see is very much whether you call it naive, whether you call it wanting to have your cake and eat it too, because Bentham is very much all pleasures are equal, all goods are equal.
Yeah.
All right, and that which is probably the purest form of utilitarianism in that sense is that
Right.
Whatever I think is good, and that's fine. Whatever whatever means
It's a very self-centered
are
notion
justified.
of...
Yes,
Yeah, and it's
and the
very
ends
relative.
justify the means is at the heart of utilitarianism when you boil it down to that.
Yeah, that's right.
But he takes this stuff, I think, in a very elitist take, which is my critic of the Enlightenment philosophers, is that they're elitist snobs. And I think he is too, because he is very much for the higher pleasures. In other words, the very snooty, intellectual, and moral pleasures in that sense, as opposed to the physical forms of pleasure, which he calls the lower. Those are bad, which is very much a Victorian idea, even though he's not Victorian.
Hey, John Stuart Mill, it's okay. Let me sit down and drink a beer. And
Right,
that's
'cause I
my
like it.
pleasure. And then, yes, if you want to read a Victorian novel and that's your pleasure, I'm fine with that.
Right, or
But he wasn't.
be like us. Do both.
Yeah. I mean, he wanted to be this egalitarian, but at the same time...
He's a snob about it.
My pleasures are better than yours.
Exactly, and that's the problem I have with the Enlightenment philosophers.
Yeah.
They're all very much for these ideals and principles that we talk about, but only for the right people.
Yeah. And bring up Malthus. Of course, Malthus' thing is population. Oh, there's going to be too many people and it's going to destroy everything. Well, of course, Malthus has been borne out to be completely wrong.
That's correct.
Population keeps growing, yet our production of food isn't declining.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've seen essentially, people don't accept this, but yes, Marx is completely wrong, guys.
Right.
Yeah, he's totally.
Marx is a fantasy. Things are worth what people are willing to pay for them, not what you think they're worth because of the work that went into them.
Right. There should be an element of that, yes.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you're producing something that nobody wants,
No matter how much effort you put into it, it's
Nobody's gonna
worth
buy it.
nothing.
right. And that's the problem with Marx is that he ultimately the only way Marx works is forcing not just mediocrity, but bad stuff. I don't say worthlessness, but stuff that nobody wants on everyone just because somebody produced it. It's like, well, why don't you produce something that somebody wants? Well, it's because I want to produce this, or this is the lowest common denominator that I can produce in the largest numbers.
Yeah.
Which means it's crap.
It's a fantasy to think that all work is equal.
Correct.
No, it isn't.
Right, because the presumption is that
compared to itself, but when you're taking something teleological, in other words, you're taking it to its purpose, to its end, then that's where value is associated with something.
But digging a hole might take 6 hours, and doing heart surgery might take 6 hours.
Yeah.
But that effort is not equivalent. And
Well,
that was
that's correct.
Marx's thing. And
Because
again,
teleologically, they're very different things.
yes,
because the purpose.
the purpose.
Yeah,
Well, that's where
you
I'm
might
talking
need to dig that hole to make a well to provide the water that is necessary for A, B, C, and D, so that you are able to do the heart surgery.
Right. But lots of people have the skills to dig a hole.
Exactly.
Not very many people have the skills to perform heart surgery.
But that doesn't mean necessarily that just because you have lower amount of skills, you should make nothing. Because there is a dignity in work in and of itself.
Yes,
That is correct, yeah.
But they're not equivalent.
But it's not equivalent. Can you shut the door? Because obviously we don't want to bother Mr. Robert now that Bosco the dog has made his appearance.
We didn't really talk a huge ton here, though, about the actual flaws in utilitarianism. So I wanted to go back to Francis on that, though.
Well,
I mean, we've been swinging. I've been swinging a pretty heavy axe handle.
Well, that's why I wanted to get to the specifics. Yeah. What are the bad ideas?
Yes. And again, Malthus' bad idea. It's like that's not been borne out to be accurate. You know, you came up with this idea that everyone's going to die unless we curb the number of poor Irish people, which is it was ethnic and racist.
Because
it was
Malthus
Catholic.
is one of the big.
You know, we don't want all them Catholics over there in Ireland. They're going to make all of us Anglican starve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, Malthus, you're wrong. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, eugenics comes from that. Margaret Sanger comes from that. It's all Hitler comes from that, which I hate to go there because that's kind of like meant to be like when you end things up. But the harm principle is something that's extremely important here because I think this is the one piece of his philosophy that is everywhere in our modern day society. And I want us to kind of pick this apart if we can, as with what little time we have left here. And his harm principle is such as the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community, that's either societal or political or whatever you want to call it, against his will is to prevent harm to others. In other words, anything goes that you want to do unless it harms others.
But that principle in itself is not well defined because it sounds like a great idea. Well, it sounds like a great idea.
Harm is nebulous. Harm can be whatever I decide it is.
Well, and therein lies the issue here.
Because you've made a microaggression against me.
Yeah, you didn't use my pronouns, therefore that's a harm.
I'm harmed.
Yeah.
But are you really?
Yeah.
I mean,
are you harmed to the point where reparations of some sort are required?
Well, some people would say
that's what I'm talking about here.
That's subjective too.
Right. Yes. And beyond reparations, I mean, he would talk about an altering society to prevent that harm. It's like, but once you start doing that, then
are you not harming others?
Then you are not going against the very principle of liberty that you are espousing.
Right.
Because the only method to prevent this sort of thing here, either socially or politically, are laws or codes of conduct or something agreed upon by the majority, which goes back again to that very thing, other thing he cautions against, the tyranny of the majority. Well, ultimately, that's where this ends, is whoever has the greatest number has the power.
Well, but see, and maybe this is the problem with philosophy in general, as much as I love philosophy, and that is this, is that they operate in a vacuum in their ideas.
Everything is static. It has to be.
Well, I don't even think it's that so much, but they are presuming things that are not demonstrable in the real world and are utterly silly as a presumption for your foundation. Yes. That is that everybody will act in everybody's best interest.
Well, and so many of the people that we have looked at and discussed, and especially Mill, their milieu is so limited.
Well,
they see only things from the outside. They didn't live it.
Yes,
so they think they have a prescription, but it's like, is that prescription a paternalistic solution?
But honestly,
you didn't live it. You don't know what their dreams are. You don't know what that Yorkshire coal miner's dreams are.
Because Mill was very much wanting to what you just said about that person, that individual person.
Very
must have the ability to do that, and yet ironically he does so in a vacuum, like you're saying.
Yeah, so, part of the problem with a lot of the philosophers we've talked about, they're social as well as political philosophers, because it's really hard to break the two apart. Because ultimately you have to have a way to guarantee your social philosophy.
And he was a little bit of everything, because he was an economist, philosopher, politician.
He was one of the original polymaths. He was highly intellectual.
Well,
his father's
Aquinas was the original, probably.
One
of the original. But anyway,
but he's absolutely that, and that's one of the reasons his father did what he did to him, is because he recognized early on this kid is a prodigy.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah.
Part of the problem with all of this, with all of these philosophers, and it's inherent, I think, in our own discussions and our predilections. Even Martin's "Leave me the hell alone and get off my grass" is this: it requires a strong state to guarantee whatever your preference is. That's the dichotomy. And I think that, even in our own discussions and our own preferences, we don't realize that. But it's true. To enable Martin to be able to be left alone requires somebody to hold everybody else at bay. Because Martin's too busy doing whatever. Because otherwise he's going to have to be on his own walls shooting people as they come out of his grass. And what's the point in that?
I mean, I still have to work.
Right, and you still have to work.
I still have to work, so I don't have time.
You don't have time to do that. So
patrol my yard with a shotgun.
Right, and now that Mrs. Martin works out of the house as well all the time with you, she can't do it.
Yeah.
So
I can turn it over to Bjorn, but I mean, he's got class.
Ultimately, he's got to go do it. But ultimately, he's going to be moving out, God willing, at some point, right?
Someday.
Yeah, hopefully. So.
Hopefully not to Japan like he wants. But.
Well, we'll see. I mean, he'll probably come home, but But the point is, though, every system, whether it's Marx, Mills, or an anarchist, ironically enough, requires a power strong enough to impose that system on anybody who doesn't want it.
Yeah, I mean, to reach a Lockean or Hume state, you still have to have a Hobbesian.
Exactly, Leviathan. Because
what does the purpose of government become? Where, the three of us would say government exists to protect the liberties of the citizenry, and particularly the minority.
Mill would have said that very differently. He would have thought
government exists to level things.
That's right.
That whole notion of, and again, when I talk about these bad ideas of
it goes back to, and I don't want to lose this because you touched on this. The reason that Mill would never agree with anything we're saying is because he is believing, and it's a very good belief actually, that every individual has the right and the ability to decide for themselves in harmony with everyone else.
Well, I think he's presuming, though, because
there's a huge presumption there.
Yeah, there's a huge presumption. First, because when we talk about the higher pleasures and the lower pleasures, he thinks everyone will always decide for the higher pleasures once they have experienced both. Because his thing is basically those little people, the poor people, the ones we don't want to associate with, they've not been able to experience the higher pleasures.
Right.
Therefore, that's why they choose the sensual pleasures.
Yeah. Now, he was an advocate of universal education, which is very good.
Which is great. But on the other hand, though, I think he's unable to recognize that some people are just going to choose different things than you do.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to read philosophy. We like it, but we also realize, well, yeah, we like to sit back and drink a beer or a bourbon and enjoy the finer things, because the finer things in life are not always intellectual. And for him, they are.
Yeah, that's right. He was very egalitarian and took great pride in such being so, but didn't recognize that egalitarianism is kind of like Bella Oxford. Yeah, but I got to be the unity.
Exactly. Well, exactly. He's still very much an Enlightenment kind of thinker in the sense that
everybody thinks the way I do, or should. That's
exactly
kind of underneath what's going on.
That is really the danger.
Right, and only the right kind of people, and by the right kind of people I mean the ones who think like I do, are the ones who should be running things. And things like that. This is the problem. And we all think this in many ways.
Forward today in our modern society.
And that's,
the only reason this didn't work is because the right people haven't tried it.
But you know what? We still say it's the left, the right, the middle, the non-aligned. We still all think this. This is part and parcel of our fallen nature in that we all think that, if everybody just believed the way we do, everything would work out.
Yeah. Well, it is a function of cognitive bias in many ways.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very much so. Excuse me, confirmation bias.
Same thing. I mean, similar things.
Right. But in many respects, it's confirmation bias because we're surrounding ourselves only by the things that work with the way we think like that, and therefore we cannot. And here I think is the flaw with his argument. Just to boil it down, there's a lack. Even though he attempts it, I think there is still a lack of empathy for the other.
Yes,
he would disagree. He says he very much has it. He thinks that's a linchpin in many respects of what he's doing here. But his applications show very clearly that it's only those. That is not a unit. That's not an absolute. He still defines a subgroup of the larger group as those.
Well, because he defines, when he talks about the greatest good, he has a very narrow definition of it.
That's right.
And it sounds like, well, that's got to be wrong, Robert, because it doesn't say the greatest good for the greatest number. But yes, but he's defining what the greatest good is. Which is definitely not the physical pleasures, the sensual. He's not a sensualist in his philosophy in that sense, except that he takes pleasure in what is the intellectual good, the arts, literature, which is great. Those are all good things. Don't get me wrong.
But to say they're the only good things.
Sometimes a good steak
he's not saying
is
they're
also
the only
a good
goods.
thing.
Yes, he's saying that those are always better than the other
he's
things.
creating a hierarchical relationship with good.
Yes. And that's problematic because once you start saying that this pleasure is better, categorically and fundamentally, it all leads back to the state has got to impose that.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have to find a forcible way to discourage the other pleasures.
Exactly. Well, that's what the state is for.
That's right.
To discourage the other pleasures.
It's ultimately an us versus them. In many respects, it's kind of racist. Certainly classist.
I think classist is ultimately.
It's better. He's not thinking that way, although it could be interpreted that way at times.
He may not think he's thinking that way, but I think he has to be.
That's right.
Because it's just a reality, still, unfortunately, that those who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum tend to be the lesser educated. Yeah. Not always, because you've got a lot of people who have educated themselves into poverty. But you have a lot of people who, generally speaking, the less you make, the less your education. At least in the West, that's true for the most part. You tend to be more about the physical pleasures. You tend to be, oddly enough, the poorer you are, the fatter you are, because you don't have the money to buy the food that is the best things you could eat. Not necessarily the goods like steaks and oysters and
in the modern times.
It's in modern times, yes.
Say in the Middle Ages was
but even the blue collar worker is more sedentary than anybody was before.
Right. Because
even from Mill's time.
Yeah. Right. Because you don't have to physically chop down trees with an axe to get your lumber. Now don't get me wrong. I couldn't do that. Be a lumberjack, even though they're using chainsaws and mechanical tools.
They're a lumberjack, and they're okay.
And they're okay.
They work all night and sleep all day.
It's far less taxing physically than it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You don't have one huge saw that you got two guys pushing back and forth to cut down a tree. It takes all day to do one tree. Now you're doing it wholesale. You're industrialized. Building a car 150 years ago, they're doing it by hand. 125 years ago, you're getting the first inklings of a assembly line.
Yeah, specialization of, hey, your job is to bolt on the shocks.
Exactly. Or your job is to put the bolt in. This guy's job is to actually tighten it up.
Yeah.
So it's still very manual in many ways, but nowadays you're right. Blue collar workers, they tend to stand in one place and do one thing, like on an assembly line, or they're doing things that are very specialized, they're manual but with time saving and strength saving tools.
It's interesting how much the world changed from Mill's time to ours, and how his philosophy, which was thought to be universal, so much breaks down in the light of advanced technology and societal.
Well, and as Robert mentioned, our educational goals so diverged because of specialization. Again, you could go incredibly in debt and be not very well off at all.
Yeah,
and be very poor, but be very highly educated.
Right. Well, I don't know. Some of these degrees that you can get nowadays, I don't know. I call them very educated. You got the sheepskin, but I don't know how educated you really are.
Well, you're educated in puffery, basically.
Yes.
You have a credential. That doesn't mean you know anything.
Right.
While at the same time, you can be fairly financially successful not quote uneducated, but
your education
non-traditionally educated.
is very specific in a particular trade.
Right.
And he would probably look down on that kind of person because they're not going to be into reading philosophy and going to...
He would. Nevertheless, both are, by any stretch of imagination, those who are successful are educated, whether that be traditionally or untraditionally.
Right, whether you're educated in chemistry or you're educated in how to assemble and install and maintain an HVAC system.
That's right.
Both are very valid, and both can lead to success.
In other words,
but it's a different type of
they
education.
would be skilled labor in some fashion.
Yeah.
Whereas the unskilled labor, that's where you run into the issue.
Well, we don't really have a whole lot of unskilled labor that is required in this country anymore. Because even ditch digging is not really... You don't dig that with a shovel anymore.
You got to know how to run that machine.
You got to know how to run that machine.
Well, and therein lies, of course...
And you got to know how to do other things with that machine.
Well,
it's not just digging ditches.
Ultimately, though, you have to have some form of unskilled labor for society to exist, because there's...
Okay, yes.
Because I think
pushing
that number
a broom,
of unskilled laborer, that's a fairly constant number. There's a range, but it's never going to go below a certain number.
Today, maybe, but of course, in his time, it's much larger.
It's enormous. In fact, it's the bulk.
So you're right. So yeah, there is unskilled labor. So people who are cleaning up after guests in a hotel, that's relatively unskilled labor. It doesn't take much to teach that in that sense. Okay. Being a janitor, custodial engineer, however you want to put it. Yeah. There's not. Although when you get into the higher end places, stuff, and even in that, you have to have some knowledge of HVAC.
Retail work is fairly easy.
It is unskilled.
It is unskilled as a general rule.
As a general rule, when you're a checker. Now, retail is a very skilled thing in the sense you got to know your products.
That's correct.
If you're working the floor at JCPenney's and you're just ringing people up who bring their product, or at Kroger's, that's relatively unskilled. But a sales position is actually a very skilled,
very much so,
position. Which can still be retail, because if you work at Marks and Spencer in the jewelry department, you probably are very skilled.
Sure. That retail can be car sales as well. You're still working. It means you're working directly with the public.
And that's actually a very skilled thing, because you got to know your products.
Well,
to really move cars, you got to be able to build trust with people and know the product that you're selling.
Right.
Well, and to be a successful car salesman.
And you will be washed out very, very quickly if you are not performing. It's a highly performance-based industry. Yeah. My point is, there's lots of that stuff out there, but it's very different than what Mill would have seen at his time.
Yeah.
He's not that. He's born during, Napoleon is still around when he's born. Wellington is famous for saying about his soldiers, gin is the spirit of their patriotism. And so much of that is exactly true during Mill's lifetime, because you're talking about the rise of industry during the time of his life, and it was almost a monster that chewed people up and spit them out.
It's certainly
there were no laws against so much.
Yeah,
and
a Yorkshire coal miner was not a happy existence.
So
that's right.
I feel like we've not.
We've let Mill off the hook here too much.
Yeah, I feel like we have not really enunciated.
We're making a lot of
why
excuses
we
for
think.
him.
Well, because he did have a lot of good stuff to say.
See, that's it.
But
he's complicated.
Why is it that his ideas are so bad? Beyond, so I think for Martin it seems to be because they lead to he wants to use government power to do things.
Big part of it.
Okay, but honestly, and again, I'm not trying to let him off the hook, because for me, utilitarianism is the part that I have the biggest problem with, because of where that ultimately leads. Yes, I understand that he wants to say you cannot do harm to do good, which is a very Catholic principle.
Yeah, we would
you cannot do evil in order to do good.
Sure.
Your motives to do good have to also be pure. It's a very Vorlon way of looking at things.
That's right.
He does. He takes motivation completely out of the equation, which that's a huge.
Does he?
Flaw in the middle.
I think
it's neutral towards that. That's correct.
I don't know that he necessarily takes motivation out of it, because I guess in a way he does, because that whole part though about not harming one another. I guess the definition there, for me, the problem is nobody pays any attention to that when you start talking about doing the greatest
practical aspect. You're exactly right.
But also, those who are doing what they think to be the greatest are the ones who get to define the harm.
Yes.
That's problematic.
Yeah, that's correct. Because
But also, it's also problematic, though, to let those who are being harmed be the ones who solely get to define it, because that's when we get the microaggression kind of idea.
Yeah.
And that's bad, too, because, you can just be a whiny bitch, and if you get to define harm because you're a whiny bitch, and I'm not saying everybody who does, I'm not saying everybody...
Well, but it's like letting the Karens run the world.
Exactly! Yeah. It's letting the Karens run the world. It just
feels like, again, that we use that word naive. It just feels like at the center of everything he's doing, there's a naivete that everyone would act with good intentions.
Well, that is explicitly part of his doctrine. He makes no bones about that.
So
he believes
wrong. It's so wrong.
But then again, it sounds so good that everybody is smart enough to figure stuff out.
Yeah, Marxism sounds really good when you describe it in the sense that everybody basically gets whatever they want. Because we're all working for one another to make sure everybody... That's all great, but that's not humanity. And it's impossible in reality. Because, again, it gets back to the doctor. If it takes 10 years to become a doctor and become the best at what he is, how do you not reward him with anything better than, well, you're going to make $30,000 a year because that's the minimum that everybody... That's what everybody makes.
That's what everybody... Well, again, there's a naivete about the human character. Yes. We are fallen creatures. And if you don't proceed from that... from that starting point, everything you do is a house.
Well, yeah, because his solution is people are fallen, because he doesn't ignore that, but government won't be.
And that's part of the problem.
Because they're in a course that is run by people. That's exactly right. There's the naivete I think you're trying to hit on this, because sooner or later, when you take into account the fact that human beings by their nature are going to have conflicting issues on a regular basis, his solution is greatest good, smallest harm. That still implies that some will be harmed.
Yes,
when you're in the macro, which is very problematic, because
who defines harm? Who defines how much is too much?
Because by using his theory, to use the words of Jean-Luc Picard, it's a failure of imagination, because you never go all the way to make the perfect system, as close as you can make it, where everybody gets served. And somebody gets something.
But there's that naivete about what is the perfect system. Your definition of perfect is different from mine.
Well, even if you go back to the greatest good for the greatest number, how do you define what the greatest good is?
Yeah. Or what's your greatest number? 51%?
Exactly.
What about the minority? What about those who are disenfranchised, et cetera, et cetera? That's one of the things that we as a society, I think, have tried to adapt out of him, thinking, no, wait a minute, you can't, no child left behind, et cetera, whatever you want to call it. We want to make sure that everybody gets served.
But
and his philosophy stops short of that.
Yeah, there's a distinctly American, as opposed to British, concept about government of, a democracy is the wolves deciding what's for lunch.
The wolves and the rabbit.
Right, the wolves and the rabbit. Or the wolves and the sheep, The democracy is the wolves voting for what's for lunch, but a republic is the sheep get a say.
The
rabbit has a gun.
Exactly.
And that's a very American concept that's not in his thinking as a Brit.
Well, yeah.
Because so what? I mean, as long as we only eat one sheep and not all the sheep, we limited the harm.
Well,
the wolves prospered.
Right.
But what about the harm?
And the wolves way outnumber the sheep.
Or what about this? So that's really, because obviously we always think, well, the wolves are the bad guys, the sheep are the good guys in that sense. But really, it's more of, that's when 100 sheep say, well, you know what? Let's eat the wolf.
Yeah.
We think, oh, well, that's a good thing, because, wolves are a danger. So we've eliminated a danger, but we've harmed the wolf in doing it. Well, when you start applying that to people, that's a problem. Because think about today's political culture. Everybody wants to say, well, we are the 100 sheep, and those guys over there, that's the wolf that needs to be eliminated.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, that would be the greatest good. But that implies that we no longer have the ability to say what is a common good for everybody.
Yeah, and Mill predates all that because that philosophy, that's World War I, folks. We talked about that many, many times. The enemy is the devil and must be destroyed. They must be wiped from the face of the planet. That's something that Mill would never conceive of that as a way of living. He would say, you may not be the best, there may be winners and losers, but you're still alive, you can still work on something else. Not in this new philosophy, this disquieting escalation of the way we deal with our enemies.
Well, in many, I don't know, a lot of what Mills has to say about liberty and rights, I think, is very good.
Yes.
It's very, and it really is the basis for a lot of what we understand as what is right and good.
Yeah, and he steals a lot from Voltaire. I didn't say that a lot, but he does. There's a definite.
Well, everybody stands on the shoulders of giants.
Well, that's correct. I mean, he's not.
Even if I don't agree with all the giants, I mean.
Well, that's right. Yeah, because that's there are a lot of those folks that go into, like I say, he steals from David Hume. He steals from Jeremy Bentham. There's a lot of folks that kind of are the roots.
I think steals is just a bad way to put it.
Well, that's true.
Because that's implying
he stands on.
Yeah, there is a time, a thread that would go from Hobbes, Locke, Hume, like we've done,
right,
to Bentham to him,
right.
But so the problem with I guess the bad ideas are this, at least for me, is the majority gets to decide what the greatest good is and what the minimal harm is.
Yeah,
and those that are in the minority don't. Mm-hmm. Even though on the other hand, he's all this about protecting free speech. He's very big in that.
That's right.
Never silent speech. So he's also at odds with modern liberals, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Even modern conservatives.
He sees no harm in that. In fact, it's an absolute good for him.
Yes,
that's very American, even though he's Brit.
Yeah. But he's also at a time where in many ways, he's the radical, so of course you don't want to silence the
right. He would be he's the on the outside looking in,
right? But so in many ways, those are great ideas. I think I do agree with Martin in that one of his big problems is that he wants to use the power of government to apply that greatest good, and that's where we start getting into problems.
Yeah, because he doesn't. He knows not what he does to go biblical on you. I don't think he realizes just exactly the potential for power that the government absolutely has, which is ironically so because he's living.
Well, he's pre-Lord Acton too.
Yes, he is.
So he's not yet heard that.
But yet, Britain dominates the world at this point. So he is at the apex, societally speaking.
Which of course implies, of course, we are right and good because we are at the top.
Yeah.
It's very much an elitist point of view. Well, Darwinism, societal Darwinism is an elitist point of view.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to have another opportunity to get our axe handles out of the bag and go after him in our next episode.
Yep.
So I guess, Francis, do you have anything to wrap up?
No, I think we worked with this very, very well. In many respects, we're going to continue this discussion next episode.
Well, it's going to be interesting because it's code of honor, which I know this is your job to say it's code of honor, but normally we do code of honor and we talk about quotes that we like. And there is a lot in Mills to say that we like, but I feel like if we're going to really do our dislike of Mills, we have to pick quotes we don't like and why we don't like it. And my job is going to be really difficult to come up with one quote that epitomizes why I don't like it. So I don't know.
We decided to pick quotes that we love about him.
There's so much here that you could pull out that you like, but at the same time, you're separating a lot of that from the context of his philosophy behind those quotes.
Sometimes.
Not
always.
Because I think
it's still complicated.
Because I think he holds two philosophical ideas that are at opposition, which is his ideas on liberty and his ideas on utilitarianism. They are, in my opinion, in opposition in reality.
Yeah.
Philosophically, maybe they go hand in hand.
Well, he does a very, but he stitches them together almost as if they're in this,
Sure. And in an ideal world, they would be.
Yeah.
But in a practical world, they are in opposition.
Yeah. Like I said, the thing he forgets is people suck.
Yeah.
It's very direct, succinct.
Well, it's because to him and the people that he deals with, they don't. It's part of the problem with the Enlightenment philosophers.
He's living in a bubble.
Right. They have lived in a bubble, and that's part of the problem with philosophers of this age, is that they're part of an intellectual establishment, whether they're on the ins or the outs. I mean, Nietzsche's probably the best example of somebody who's on the outs and never gets on the in. So therefore, I think that's why he's so critical of a lot of things, and why he's comes across the way he does. But somebody like Mills and all the way going back to Voltaire, they're on the inside.
And again, Mill's enough of a star, enough of like the equivalent of a rock star. He ends up in Parliament.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, he and Voltaire both had that same, charisma about them, and they spoke so well and wrote so well that, of course, you want him at your dinner parties.
Exactly, and so that puts you in a very rarefied air kind of bubble.
Yes, very much so.
As opposed to somebody who's like one of these social anarchist kids that are, Occupy Wall Street, or creating a autonomous zone in Seattle or what have you. They're living in a different kind of bubble.
That's correct. Yes.
But it's essentially, when we say bubble, what we mean is an echo chamber.
Well, a padded echo chamber.
Well,
I mean, those kids.
It's confirmation bias on it.
Yeah, I mean, they also have iPhones.
Right.
They all still have computers. They all still have shoes on their feet. These are not the kids of coal miners.
Right.
These are,
Kids
society
of coal
is so
miners
terrible. I have to set up an autonomous zone, but oh my goodness, I got to go home and do my laundry.
Right. Or more likely, things are, this is a great place, but please don't look over there where those rapes and sexual assaults happen, because we didn't have any police or anybody taking care of things like that.
That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I don't know that we did a great job with this episode, because it seemed like we went all over the place. Maybe we'll wrap it up better than next
big.
But Mill was all over the place.
Well, that's right. He's too big. He wrote so much, so often, is so deep. And I knew he'd have a difficulty with this. I just knew he would.
Again, just like Kant, it's very hard to wrap your arms around.
That's correct. And I'm more inclined to give us a bit of a pass on this, because we're going to continue the discussion next episode.
Yes. So, yes, again, what's next time?
It's Code of Honor, and we're going to do exclusively quotations from John Stuart Mill. So that way, hopefully, we can maybe reach a better ending with our 2-episode discussion of him than we do at this point. So, post, just as a pause, folks, check with us next episode. We're going to continue.
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes drop every second and fourth Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms, and leave us a review. That helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next time.